All right, let's get into it. Today we're looking at what you could call a perfect storm brewing in Iran. Because while the whole world has its eyes on Iran's nuclear program, there's this other, much quieter crisis unfolding inside its borders, a crisis of water. We're going to connect those dots and show how these two stories are really just two fronts in the same war. So on one side, you have the story we all hear about, Iran's big geopolitical ambitions, its nuclear program, and of course the international sanctions that come with it. But then there's this other story, one that's not told nearly as often, about a massive internal environmental collapse. We're talking about a drought so severe that experts are now calling it water bankruptcy. And believe me, it threatens the very fabric of the nation.
And that's really the big question we're tackling today, isn't it? Are these just two separate, unfortunate things happening at the same time? Or are they deeply connected, feeding each other in one big, dangerous cycle? As we're about to see, when you pull on these threads, you find a nation under incredible pressure, not just from the outside world, but from within its own borders.
Okay, let's start with that external pressure point, the nuclear program. Because here's the thing, it's far from being stopped. In fact, it's made this really dramatic strategic shift precisely because of all the international pressure and attacks. Now, what's so fascinating here is the strategy. After some of their known sites were damaged or just plain destroyed, Iran didn't just rebuild. No, they adapted. They're actually demolishing their own exposed facilities and moving the most critical parts of the program into these super-hardened, deep underground bunkers. And at the same time, they're speeding up their capabilities, especially when it comes to testing the really complex mechanics of implosion. So even though the program has taken some hits, it's actually become smarter, more nimble, and it's shrunk its breakout time to a nuclear weapon down to just a matter of weeks.
And this number, well, it just shows you the sheer scale of the challenge. Iran has piled up over 8,400 kilograms of enriched uranium. To put that in perspective, that is over 40 times the limit that was set by the original nuclear deal. But the critical point here isn't just the huge amount, it's the lack of oversight. The UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, says it's lost what it calls continuity of knowledge. In plain English, they can no longer be sure what Iran is doing with all that nuclear material.
So you can imagine, this has created a major diplomatic standoff. The big European powers, we're talking France, Germany, and the UK, they're trying to keep the lines of communication open, but they've also drawn a very clear line in the sand. They've publicly warned Iran that if diplomacy goes nowhere, they have totally clear legal grounds to trigger what's called the snapback mechanism, and that would reimpose all the old UN sanctions. That diplomatic bridge, it's definitely starting to fray.
All right, so now we're going to turn from that external standoff to the other front in this war, an internal crisis. That's less about geopolitics and a lot more about basic, day-to-day survival.
Experts are arguing that what's happening in Iran isn't just your typical drought. They have a much more powerful term for it, a socio-economic drought, or even better, water bankruptcy. This is a situation where the demand for water has become so huge that it consistently, year after year, outstrips the natural supply that gets renewed by rain and snow. The country is, quite literally, spending water that it just doesn't have.
And the signs of this bankruptcy are everywhere. In huge cities like Tehran, water is now being severely rationed. Famous lakes and rivers, things that are central to the country's identity, they're just disappearing. And as people drill deeper and deeper for water, the actual ground beneath their cities is sinking. This isn't some far-off prediction. This is a damaging daily reality for millions of Iranians right now.
So, faced with this pretty dire situation, the government is looking for some big technological fixes. But as we're about to see, trying to engineer your way out of a crisis this deep, well, it's loaded with its own set of problems. So there are really two main options on the table. First up, you've got wastewater reuse. Think of it like a giant recycling program for water. Research shows it has clear environmental and economic benefits. The second option is desalination, turning salt water from the sea into fresh water. This offers what looks like a steady, almost endless supply, but, and it's a big but, it comes at an absolutely staggering cost, both in the energy it consumes and the damage it does to the environment.
And the main takeaway here, there are no silver bullets, none. Take wastewater reuse, for example. It faces a lot of public resistance and has really high startup costs. Or how about trying to price water to manage demand? That's tricky too. If you charge farmers more, they might just pump even more groundwater to make sure they get their money's worth, making the problem worse. Even brand new ideas like this hypo technology, which uses pressure in water pipes to generate electricity, are still too new and expensive to solve the immediate water shortage.
And this is where it all comes together. This is where our two stories, the external ambition of the nuclear program and the internal collapse of the water supply, violently slam into each other and start feeding off one another.
So on one hand, you have the regime projecting this image of incredible strength and defiance to the rest of the world. This massive stockpile of enriched uranium, it's the ultimate symbol of that external ambition.
But on the other hand, back home, the situation is completely falling apart. Essential services are failing. There are reports that up to 80% of the nation's pharmacies are on the brink of going bankrupt. And that is a powerful, powerful symbol of the deep internal strain caused by sanctions and just plain economic mismanagement.
And this slide right here perfectly captures the dangerous feedback loop they're trapped in. It starts with internal problems, right? Like water shortages. That fuels public anger. This makes the regime feel vulnerable. So what does it do? It doubles down on its nuclear program to project strength abroad. That, of course, provokes more international sanctions, which then forces the regime to divert even more money to its security and military programs, starving the domestic economy and making the internal crises even worse. You see, it's a truly vicious cycle.
You know, this incredible strain is starting to create some very real political fractures inside Iran. Influential groups, like the country's reformist front, are now publicly, and this is a big deal, calling for a change in direction. They're actually arguing that the nation's survival depends on fixing things at home and taking a softer approach abroad, even suggesting they voluntarily suspend uranium enrichment to get some sanctions relief.
So, it all comes down to this. The compounding crises have forced an impossible, stark choice on the regime: guns or water.
At the end of the day, the final calculation is this. Can a government that's battling a collapse at home, I'm talking a failing healthcare sector, a bankrupt water supply, and growing political dissent, really afford to pour its precious resources into a high-risk nuclear program that basically guarantees more pressure from the outside world? That tension right there between its internal needs and its external ambitions, that is going to define everything for Iran in the year ahead.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty sobering question. It's a question that goes way beyond geopolitics, beyond sanctions and centrifuges, and really forces us to think about the profound human consequences of these crises crashing into each other. What is the true cost of projecting power to the world when your own nation is literally dying of thirst?